Hi everyone, welcome to season 2 of the Virtual Coach Advantage from Springboard Future. I'm Emma Calvert, your podcast host, and as ever, I'm delighted to be here with my co-founder and our master coach, Neela. Say hi, Neela.
Hello. Hi, everybody, and hi, Ruth.
Hello.
We're really excited to launch season 2 of our podcast with a very special guest, Ruth Cooper-Dickson. Ruth is a positive psychologist and also the founder of SHAMPS, which is a mental wellbeing consultancy. And we've got a great topic we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about when you're stepping up into a new managerial or leadership role, what are some of the things that you're faced? And often a lot of our coaches talk to us about confidence and imposter syndrome, feeling like they're faking it to make it. So we've got a great topic. Ruth's written a lot around confidence and imposter syndrome. So we have the real expert with us here today. But I want to kick off first, Neela, because you're the sort of executive C-suite coach here. Tell us a little bit about, from your experience of coaching people, when they're sort of stepping up, what are some of the things that we face when we're moving into those roles?
Yes, thank you, Emma. Yeah, it's interesting, actually. It happens to men and women, in my experience, as they step up into bigger roles, typically, into board roles from more functional roles. And the question is always to me, am I enough? Can I occupy my space? How are people experiencing me? Have I got enough gravitas? How am I going to perform in a boardroom setting? And interestingly enough, although more women worry about that, increasingly as I do my work, I also see it with men. Um, and so this faking it till you make it piece, I find I have to do an awful lot of work around that, particularly when people are stepping up.
It's really an interesting point, that, Neela, about the female versus male thing. And Ruth, I'd love to get your perspective on it, because it used to be almost like labeled, the confidence, the imposter syndrome, as a like women's issue, which really irritates me. But you're right. I, coach more and more people, more and more men that are talking about it now. Ruth, I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, it goes back to the original research because the original piece of research into what's actually called imposter phenomenon was done by Clance back in 1978, and it's her and her colleague who did the study. It was on high achieving women, and she labelled it imposter phenomenon because she didn't want it to be that women would have something else that they had to fix about themselves. But how, as we know, language gets kind of changed over time, and actually a syndrome is a collection of symptoms, which, as we know, imposter syndrome doesn't exist as a psychiatric disorder, for example. So it is actually, I think it's come from the fact that the original research was done, on a group of women, the original study, but research has shown that it is as Neela was saying, it affects men and women equally. I think it's something, though, that as women, as we find out with any kind of study where we're looking at emotions, women tend to talk about it more, they tend to seek help for it more, whereas men generally, as a broad assumption, but with lots of other types of any kind of mental health conditions or just anything that people are worrying about, they just don't talk about it, right? And men have always been known to kind of, well, just kind of get on with it and, I'll figure it out. But also there's also the societal expectations where, particularly as Neela, you will know in the C-suite, where it's always predominantly been men before in the past, that there's a different environment for a male versus a female executive. So yeah, it's interesting how the language has changed, but I think because that original study was done on, on a group of women, I think that is where it's kind of, travelled down from, if you like.
The other bit you just said there, Ruth, that really like amuses me is like how we have changed the language of syndrome. Like, because I literally want to be like, "There's nothing wrong with you."
Yes, yeah, I know, this is it, right? And I think to understand that there is we can still be confident, we can still be extroverts, but we can still have those doubts and those concerns that Neela mentioned before about, how someone's even perceiving me, that anxiety. And that's why, imposter phenomenon is not classed as a mental health condition in any way. That's, obviously the misconception with imposter syndrome. But actually, of course, if somebody is constantly putting themselves under those high expectations, that high performing anxiety, those worries, then of course, by default, you are putting yourself at risk of emotional overload, right? So there is a trigger process there. But it doesn't mean that anything is wrong with you, that you've got to necessarily fix it as well.
I was just wondering, Ruth, in your experience, I know you've written a lot about this. What do you think the difference between imposter syndrome and versus confidence is? What do you think the balance is there?
I think the confidence can come in. There is different aspects of where confidence really shines. You do a good job and you feel really great about that, but there is this there's this link towards, imposter phenomenon really focus more on that internal experience of intellectual phoniness. So am I a fraud? So I can still be presenting and doing a great job. I could still be showing up and delivering my projects. I could still be a leader of 50 people and doing my job, but internally, so the confidence is there externally, and people are seeing that confidence, and they may never even suspect. And it's funny, Neela, you were saying about you've come across more males in this talking about this, and I've definitely come across that more in the corporate space when coaching male leaders, that they've it's often more pointing it out with them, whereas I think with women they tend to go, oh, I feel like I've got real imposter phenomenon, because I feel that even though I've got all these qualifications, I'm hearing that a lot actually at the moment, because I'm doing a couple of group coaching programs with women who are exceptionally well qualified. They've got all the educational background. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who's about to start working with me. She says, I feel like I keep learning and putting myself on courses because I don't feel that I'm not a coach, or I'm not this person that I should be. And but she is. She totally is. But it's this intellectual phoniness, I think. It's this like, well, I don't think I am really that person who I say I am, or I don't deserve that label. So sometimes I think it's almost linked as well, not so much confidence, but more around self-esteem and self-worth. I think those are kind of often some of the root causes as well, where it comes from.
When we talk about confidence, self-esteem is so linked to confidence, and our experiences that go back, and I'm not going to take us down a kind of like psychotherapic route, but our self-esteem is so linked to our experiences. And Neela, I'm quite interested to bring in that kind of like boardroom environment and the experiences that we have, maybe going for the first time to see the exec committee or the board, and what that experience might be like for us.
Well, I think it can be quite a bruising environment. I mean, a lot of the people that I work with talk about it being significantly different to anything that they've experienced before. And therefore, true self confidence, true self esteem, understanding what your boundaries are and being able to stand your ground appropriately is so, so important. So if you're going in there feeling like an imposter, not having the confidence that Ruth is talking about, you're immediately at a disadvantage. And also being able to call on your intellectual prowess and whatever it is that you are expert on it within the board environment. It is quite a big step up. It's a really different environment. You're not rewarded necessarily for your technical skill there. You're rewarded for your presence, your gravitas, your voice. How big is your voice? So it's a big step up.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because often we get to those positions because of our technical expertise. It's our technical expertise that has, we've, helped us rise through the ranks. But what you're talking about, Neela, is a different set of skills. You're talking about the presence, the gravitas, the managing your body, managing your voice. We don't often spend time on that, do we?
We really don't. We really don't. And I think it becomes, and you don't get taught to do it. Some of us have it more naturally than others. But it's something I see that is really required. And that's where, and I totally agree with Ruth around, women absolutely do not need fixing, buy into that 100%. But women, just by definition, we have a different presence. And I'm not sort of doing that carte blanche, all women, but we tend to, just see how the land lies before we start pushing ourselves forward and putting our views forward. And in that sort of very male environment, which it often is, that can be an issue.
You're making me think of a word, and Ruth, you did as well, belonging.
Mm.
And it doesn't matter whether you're a female or male, or actually, whether you come from another diverse background, right? It's as you are going into stepping up and perhaps going into your first board meeting or your first, management meeting, whatever it is, it's that lack of belonging, right?
Yes, exactly. And we all want to feel part of a tribe.
And I think there's also a part of that as well when you say belonging. The other word then that kind of tagged on for me was that idea of authenticity, knowing who we are, believing in who we are, and then by default you kind of feel that you can show up as Neela says, when you have those boundaries and you feel actually I fit here and I can be myself and I'm part of this group. And that takes time, I think, when you're talking about stepping into that leadership space, because there's so many different politics there, depending on the culture, the individuals that are around that table. There's so many different facets to consider, and it takes that person to, I think even the most, what we'd perhaps call the most confident of people, if they as soon as they step into that space, it does take that bit of adjustment, because you naturally are growing and changing yourself anyway around how that feels. I think one thing that's come out quite a bit within the imposter phenomenon space is where people, they get to a certain point, and Emma, you touched on this about how people rise the ranks because of their skill sets, but then if you achieve a task or you achieve a promotion and you've been working 80-hour weeks and you've done things in a certain way, then actually what happens is we think that we have to be operating at a certain level each time to see the same results. That's kind of a bit like the imposter cycle. So we find ourselves in this kind of ongoing, well, if I do things differently, or if I change the way I am, or if I approach work differently, or I step back with my boundaries, or I put some space in there, that it's not going to have the same result. Like, I have to do things how I've always done them as well. So I think there is that imbalance when people start to move up. They've gone from doing things how they've always done them without thinking. There is that adjustment, there is that shift that needs to happen, I think.
There's something you said in there, Ruth, that really links back to the self-esteem, isn't there?
Mm.
And the fact that our own self-worth and our own self-esteem is the foundation, it's the building block.
And when we're starting out as well, as stepping up into that leadership space, there's huge amounts of that fear of failure, right? The idea, imposter phenomenon is very linked to fear of failure, as and if you've been promoted or you've taken on a new leadership role, there's going to be those those potentially the inner critic that many people have of what happens if I mess it up, and this is my big chance, and I've been, especially if someone's been training all that, they get to a partner level and they've spent all their years in their career, from university to that point of wanting to get to this position or to get the directorship on the board. And there's a real sense around, well, what happens if I mess this up? And we all make mistakes, right? We make mistakes as part of our jobs, or we sometimes say the wrong thing, or confrontation happens. But I think at the early stages of that, there's we can put more of an emphasis on that fear of failure as well, especially if we're not coming from a place of strong self-esteem.
which is not actually how most of us would treat other people, is it? Most of wouldn't put other people under that amount of pressure that we put ourselves under. I mean, you must see that, Neela, in the people that you coach.
Totally. I think we can be our worst enemies. And actually, as you were talking, Ruth, I was really reflecting on actually the conditions of success. And actually, what you're describing is creating psychological safety for yourself, and how you do that so that you can fail, you can make mistakes. And that does not mean that you are, by definition, a failure. And I think that actually feeds right into the imposter syndrome as well. So it's that those firm foundations. I think actually in at managerial roles, and actually maybe just further up, how you build that self-esteem before you actually make that board level move actually feels really important. It's like a growing up process almost. Um, Fascinating area of psychology. It really is. You can be grown up in your years, but not grown up in yourself in terms of how you feel about yourself.
So, what would your top tips be? I'm going to go to both of you. What are your top tips then, Neela? How do we grow up? How do we grow into our roles?
Well, I when I coach, I do a lot of work on self-awareness and really leaning into the things that Ruth is talking about around inner critic and belief systems and things that get in your way. Because I think if you can do the work with that, then you're much more likely to have firm foundations on self-esteem, and be happy with who you are. You know, you're never going to be somebody else, be who you are. And that then enables you to really fully occupy your wonderful intelligence, your technical skill, what you've got to say, etc. So I concentrate on that first before I even go to presence and all the other things and some of the very particular skills that you need at the board level. So that's the way that I do it.
It's interesting you say that, Neela, because, and I don't want to link age to growing up, right? Because we all, mature at different rates and all the rest of it. But it is only really when I've got into my 40s that I've reached this point where I'm like, I don't really care.
Yeah.
I don't care if I get fired. I don't care what people think. And then, like you say, Neela, like I can embrace my expertise, my intellectual, kind of stance, etc. Because I literally don't care anymore.
Yeah, that's right. And I use that word, it's quite a dangerous word to use, growing up. And I don't mean that in age. I mean that in the true sense of maturity.
Yeah, no, definitely. Ruth, what would your top tips around the imposter syndrome confidence be for our listeners?
Okay, well, I'm going to share one little exercise that I was asked to do not that long ago by my business coach consultant, which was to go right back to kind of the early start of my career. So we're talking 2 decades, and I keep stuff. I'm one of those hoarders that keeps the back, because we used to have development diaries at Rolls-Royce back in the 1990s, and since then I've put everything in there. And he tasked me with actually pulling out all the wonderful things that people have said about me in my career, and also achievements. And it was really nice, and kind of just reminded me, Neela, when you were talking before about the first time you go into the boardroom, and I'd printed out and saved an email from my time when I worked in wealth management from the CEO at that time, who said he'd sent me an email to say, well done on your presentation today, you were very credible and very insightful and very clear. And I'd saved that. So even now, we forget all those, because of our negative bias, we forget all the wonderful things still, right? We can be top of our game and still forget all those lovely achievements. So that was definitely something for me that was a great exercise to kind of go, oh God, yeah, I've done all of this, and I've done that and done this, and it just made me feel so much better as well, and just kind of that reaffirming of where what I've achieved. And then the other thing is an exercise I do with coaching clients. It's one that's hugely academic researched as well, which is called the best possible self. And it's this kind of idea of, you're probably nodding, so you've probably heard of it, but where you just, spend time visualizing and writing down how you'd like to perceive yourself. You write as if you're in the future, and that can be 2 months, it could be 6 years, whatever time frame you want, but you do it over a period of several days, and you can choose the topic of your career. You could, how you want to show up at work, what you would be doing, how you would feel, what sorts of things would you be saying, how would you be dressed, like all the, right down to that whole entire visualization piece. But that's been known to be really powerful, and I think it's often then, I guess, where people really struggle with that. Then that's where, like the work Neela was saying, we can start to unpick that. If you can't see yourself in that position, then okay, well, what's going off there? What's the gap? How do we work on that? But where someone does really go, oh, this is what I want, this is how I see myself standing up giving this great presentation to my boss and people clapping me and doing my targets, and great, okay, so how do we get to that? What does, and having that in your mind's eye when you're working with your coach or your manager, and remember coming back to that feeling as well. I think we forget, we're talking a lot about feelings and emotions around the psychology, so how do we internalize that? How do we internalize those positive energies as well?
Yeah, that's brilliant, Ruth. I was nodding because I love that exercise, but I love the visualization. It's elite athletes use visualization all the time. And it works, right? And if it's good enough for our Olympians, it's good enough for us in the boardroom, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ruth. I've, as ever, loved talking to you. And you can find out more about Ruth by visiting her website, which is Champs Consulting.
champsconsult.com, yeah.
There we go. So you can check more about the brilliant work that Ruth does. And we're so pleased that you've joined us for season 2 of the Virtual Coach Advantage. We've loved coaching you today. Join us again soon.